Hey crew, it's Pitt, and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Carl Jung. This is Mysterium Coniunctionis. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, the link from my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly, and the link to get in direct contact with me so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. In addition, if you really like what I'm doing over here, go ahead and give me all of the good things, and especially if you are enjoying this, there is a new feature called Hype. If you could hit the hype button, it costs you nothing, but it will promote the channel for me, and that would be very much appreciated. If you appreciate what I'm doing over here, hit the hype, please. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of Mysterium Coniunctionis with part 4 of the moon, D, the moon nature. We have treated at some length of the sinister and dangerous aspect of the new moon. In this phase, the climax of the moon's waning, which in folklore is not always considered auspicious, is reached. The new moon is dangerous at childbirth and weddings. If a father dies at the waning moon, this brings the children bad luck. You would think that would bring bad luck anyway, right? Bad luck's not really a thing. One also has to bow to the sickle moon, or it will bring bad luck. Even the light of the moon is dangerous as it causes moon sickness, which comes from the moon wolf. The marriage bed, pregnant women, and small children should be protected from the moonlight. Whoever sows by moonlight sows the winding sheet, and so on. All of those are legends. None of them have any validity. Footnote 355. That is Sudhoff. The passage on the moon in Paracelsus's De Pistillati catches, very aptly, the atmosphere which hangs around the pale moonlight. Now mark this. Wherever there is a disheartened and timid man in whom imagination has created the great fear and impressed it on him, the moon in heaven, aided by her stars, is the corpus to bring this about. When such a disheartened, timid man looks at the moon under the full sway of his imagination, he looks into the speculum venenosum magnum naturae, the great poisonous mirror of nature. And the sidereal spirit and magnus hominis, magnet of man, the magnet of man, you say, will thus be poisoned by the stars and the moon. But we shall expound this more clearly to you as follows. Through his imagination, the timid man has made his eyes basilisk-like, and he infects the mirror, the moon, and the stars through himself at the start, and later on, so that the moon is infected by the imagining man. This will happen soon and easily by dint of the magnetic power which the sidereal body and spirit exerts upon these celestial bodies, vis-a-vis the moon and the stars in great nature, vis-a-vis the macrocosm. Okay, so this is talking about the magnetic influence of the moon, but it's also talking about the magnetic influence of you, and I am in complete agreement with that. If you cannot read the beginning of that, it is A Beginner's Guide to the Mechanics of Electromagnetic Manipulation and Energetic Manifestations. That is how I have healed myself through the use of the Holy Spirit, the deliberate, intentional manipulation of the creative forces of existence. You are indeed a magnet, and you do attract the things upon which you focus. I give instructions on how to do so responsibly and effectively in this book. Thus, man in turn will be poisoned by this mirror of the moon and the stars which he has looked at. And this because, for as you can see, it happens quite naturally, a pregnant woman at the time of menstruation similarly stains and damages the mirror by looking into it. What? Okay. Poisoned by the mirror of the moon and the stars. This is internal reflection, right? This is not... The moon is infected by the imagining man. This will happen soon and easily. Like, this has all got to be some kind of an allegory. Like, Yes, you do have magnetics. Yes, they do exert influence. But there is nothing, there is nothing about a pregnant woman while menstruating damaging a mirror, right? Even the self-reflective internal like what? For at such a time she is poisonous and has basilisk eyes, ex causa menstrue et venemosae sanguis, because of the menstrual and poisonous blood which lies hidden in her body and nowhere more strongly than her eyes. Actually, there would be at least one more place where it would be more strong than her eyes. Right? While she is menstruating, there is at least one more place where the blood is going to be more influential than her eyes. For there the sidereal spirit of the stained body lies open and naked to the sidereal magnet. Because as the basilisk is caused and born from the menstrual and poisonous blood of a woman, thus the moon in the sky and the eye of the basilisk in heaven. This is some Cornelius Agrippa level stuff. Like, I am completely dismissing this. I am sure he is just recording this. That is not expressly stated by the text, but I am sure. Right? No. There is no basilisk that is caused by the blood of a woman menstruating. That is not a thing. And as the mirror is defiled by the woman, thus conversely the eyes, the sidereal body, spirit, and the body of man are being defiled by the moon, for the reason that at such time the eyes of the timid imagining man are weak and dull, and the sidereal spirit and body draw poison out of the mirror of the moon into which you have looked. But not so that only one human being has the power thus to poison the moon with his sight. No. Hence I say that mostly menstruating women do poison the moon and the stars much more readily, and also more intensely than any man. Easily so. Because, as you see that they poison and stain the mirror made of metallic material, and what is even more, the glass mirror, much more and sooner they defile the moon and stars at such a time. And even if at such a time the moon only shines on water and the woman looks at the water, this is Paracelsus, right? That slipped my mind completely. That explains exactly why this doesn't make any sense, right? Paracelsus did not have the good grip, right? We have not seen very many quotes from Paracelsus that actually gave knowledge, right? They gave a lot of assumptions, they gave a lot of this shit, but not a whole lot of actual true knowledge. And even if at such time the moon only shines on water and the woman looks at the water, the moon will be poisoned, and by still many more means, but it would not do to reveal this all clearly. And such poisoning of the moon happens for this reason. It is the naked eye of the spirit and of the sidereal body, and it often grows new and young, as you can see. Just as the young child who looks into a mirror which was looked at by a menstruating woman will become long-sighted and cross-eyed, and his eyes will be poisoned, stained, and ruined, as the mirror was stained by the menstruating woman. This is an allegory, at best, with a key that I absolutely do not have. There is no part of this that is making any sense other than that humans have magnetics. Right? That is literally the only part of this that has made sense at all. And so, also the moon and also the human being is poisoned. And as the moon, when it grows new and young, is of a poisonous kind, this you shall notice in two ways, namely in the element of water and also in wood, loam, etc. At this, when it is gathered at the wrong time, will not burn well, but be worm-eaten, poisonous, bad, and putrid. So is also the moon, and that is why it can be poisoned so easily by merely looking at it. And the moon with his light in the humanum ignis, moisture of fire, of a cold nature, for which reason it is capable of receiving the poison easily. 356. Sudhoff. In the table of correspondences in Penotus, 357, pseudonym Bernardus Apotu Aquitanus. Correspondences in Penotus, the following are said to pertain of the moon: the snake, the tiger, the manes, the lemur, and the infernales. These correlations show clearly how Penotus was struck by the underworld nature of the moon. 358. The moon also has a relation to Saturn, the astrological maleficus. In the Dicta Bellini, Saturn is, as it were, the father-mother of the moon. I am the light of all things that are mine, and I cause the moon to appear openly from within my father Saturn, even from the pregnant mother who is at enmity with me. Allegory Septenium. Saturn plays the role of Typhon, dismemberment. I will pause here to point out that there is an alternative method for the construction of the solar system besides the Copernican one. It is not necessarily geocentric, but there is an element of geocentrism in it. And if you wish to investigate it further, it is called the Tychos model, Tychos. Not necessarily as originally formulated, but more along the lines of the recent developments in that model, in which Saturn may have been a sun at one point in time, that there may have been a different astronomical alignment. For another reference for that, you can see the Thunderbolts project, where they have done a very good job of discussing these particular things in some great length with much more expertise than I have. But the Tychos model allows for sacred geometry. It compensates for all of the retrogrades with perfect understandability, whereas the Copernican model does not. It is built upon math and physics, and it works a lot better than the Copernican model. If you are interested, there are resources out there. I'm not going to try and link them. You are welcome to find them, but they are out there. Now, and on my page, right, I have at least one of those linked. It is the Thunderbolts Project is linked on my YouTube page in the suggested channels. All right. His heretical empiricism led him beyond the patristic allegories to a recognition of the moon's dark side, an aspect no longer suited to serve as an allegory of the beauteous bride of Christ. And just as the bitch was forgotten in the lunar allegory of the church, so too our masculine judgment is apt to forget it when dealing with an overvalued woman. We should not deceive ourselves about the sinister tail of the undoubtedly desirable head. The baying of Hecate is always there, whether it sounds from near or from far. This is true of everything feminine and not least of man's anima. The mythology of the moon is an object level in female psychology. 359. Medical psychologists would profit from Esther Harding's account of moon psychology in her book, Woman's Mysteries. See especially Chapter 12, The Inner Meaning of the Moon Cycle. Now, we have repeatedly talked about in this particular study, in these last 3 chapters, most especially, the influence of the moon on the brain, right? It is a definite thing. There is very little doubt that it can't even be expressed that this is a thing that happens. If you believe that the moon does not have a psychological effect upon people, you have never been to the emergency room during a full moon. And you've never read the police reports during a full moon. There is a marked increase in all kinds of things during the full moon. It is the entire reason we have the word lunatic, right? Brought into insanity by the moon. It is a literal thing that does happen. It is also a thing that very well could regulate the female cycle, right? The menstrual cycle. That is not a poisonous thing. That is not something that is going to create a basilisk, but it is a thing that it does exist, right? It is a very real thing. And so there is absolutely an object lesson in female psychology, but there's also an object level in male psychology, right? Both of those are intrinsic to this. There is no separation from that. Both of them. The moon, with her antithetical nature, is, in a sense, a prototype of individuation, a prefiguration of the self. She is the mother and spouse of the sun, who carries in the wind and the air the spagyric embryo conceived by the sun in her womb and belly. Footnote 360. Dorn, Physistus Trismegistus from the Theatrica Chemicum, an allusion to the Tabula Smardina, the Alchemica. The wind hath borne it in its belly. What? This image corresponds to the psychologium of the pregnant anima, whose child is the self, or the marked by the attributes of the hero. Just as the anima represents and personifies the collective unconscious, so Luna represents the 6 planets, or spirits, of the metals. Dorn says, from Saturn, Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, nothing, and no other metal can arise except Luna. An example, silver. From Saturn, Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, nothing and no other metal can arise except Luna, silver. Right? There are all kinds of alchemical symbology problems, right? I don't remember which one is silver, right? I'm pretty sure that the moon is, though. I'm pretty sure that the moon was silver, right? Saturn, Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus. Nothing can come from that except silver. I don't get it. For Luna consists of these 6 spiritual metals and their powers, of which each has 2. That is just simply not true. Silver is a fundamental element in and of itself. It is not derived from any combination of something else. Silver is its own elemental thing. It is on the periodic table of elements by itself for a reason. It can combine into more silver. It can combine into various oxides even, but that is not, like, it cannot be broken down. No. It does not consist of the 6 spiritual metals or their powers. Right? As an allegory for the moon being the base, or not even the base, the divine in the lower position, the feminine, that works. And from that, these other things do derive, but not into an actual metal, right? Now, it does say spiritual metals and their powers, but that is a listing of the spiritual metals: iron, gold, silver, quicksilver. And all of them are their own elements as well. So, from the planet Mercury, from Aquarius and Gemini, or from Aquarius and Pisces, Luna has her liquidity and her brightness. No, that comes from the sun. That's where that comes from. From Jupiter, Sagittarius, and Taurus, her white color and her great stability in the fire. And again, no. From Mars, Cancer, and Aries, her hardness and fine resonance. And from Venus, Gemini, and Libra, her degree of solidity and malleability. Because, you can shape the moon. From Sol, Leo, and Virgo, her true purity and great endurance against the strength of the fire. From Saturn, Virgo, and Scorpio, or from Capricorn, her homogeneous body, her pure cleanness, and steadfastness against the force of the fire. 361 is Congiers Paracelsi, and again, Paracelsus did not have a whole lot of value. Right now, as a mimetic device, as a way to remember these particular things, fine. Right? We use mimetic devices all of the time. I use homes for the Great Lakes, and my very educated mother just gave us 9 used to be pizzas for the planets. Right? That is a mimetic device. It is something that is intended to help you remember. As that, this is fine, right? As an allegory for how you remember that Mars, Cancer, and Aries is hardness and fine resonance, or Jupiter, Sagittarius, and Taurus is white and stability, fire. Fine, that is fine. As a literal explanation of literally anything else, no, right? Even internal alchemy, this is going to be a real no, right? These things are not necessarily correlative. They do have the onus of history, right? That it has been used for a long time and that it is a tradition. It does have that, but that does not make it true, especially when we are talking about the various signs and their attributes. That is putting into a very small box a wide degree of humanity, and it does not work. I have found no reason whatsoever for correlation between the astronomical signs and things that happen on the Earth, and I have done a small investigation, not a large one, but there has been no point where I have found anybody that is doing astrology and it's actually true or actually even relevant. There has been with tarot, right? When I was investigating tarot, there were direct correlations that were not necessarily onerous extrapolations, right? There's a degree of you have to read into the cards. But when it is a consistent message across a wide variety of people and it does come to the fruition that is intimated by the cards, that is something, right? That is what I have found in tarot. That is not what I have found in astrology at all. I have found zero correlation between any of these things in astrology. So as a mimetic device, this is fine, but don't take this as literal knowledge, right? You can look at soul as purity because it is fire, right? When Leo, you can attribute that to fire, but there is no real reason to, other than the fact that it's during the summer, right? That's it, right? But so is Gemini. Gemini starts the summer. Why is it not fire? Why is it air? Just randomly, just pulled out of the ass. No real reason whatsoever. Luna is thus the sum and essence of the metals natures, which are all taken up in her shimmering whiteness. She is multi-natured, whereas soul has an exceptional nature as the seventh from the six spiritual metals. He is, in himself, nothing other than pure fire. 362. That is just a reference. This role of Luna devolves upon the anima as she personifies the plurality of archetypes, and also upon the Church and the Blessed Virgin, who, both of lunar nature, gather the many under their protection and plead for them before the Sol Iustute. Luna is the universal receptacle of all things, the first gateway of heaven. 363. Penitus and Medicament Chemicum. And William Menes, 364. Aurori Valoris Libere Tres, Theatric Chemicum. And William Menon says that she gathers the power of all the stars in herself as in a womb, so as then to bestow them on sublunary creatures. 365. A parallel to the Maria Mediatrix of the Church, who dispenses grace, because, it was the woman that dispensed the grace. That's where the grace came from, was from the lady that gave birth. Right? That's where the grace came from. It didn't come from God. It didn't come from the representative therefore, right? It came from where he came from. That's where the grace came from. This quality seems to explain her alleged effect in the Opus Ad Lunam, when she gives the tincture the character and power of all the stars. The fragment from the Persian philosophers says, "With this tincture all the dead are revived, so that they live forever, and this tincture is the first created ferment." 366. Presumably ether as quinta essentia. That would be the spirit. And the ether is the spirit, and quinta essentia is the ether as spirit. And so, yeah, okay. And now, with the spirit, all the dead are revived. True, when you die, you are revived, you go to the eternal, so that they live forever. And agreed, right? The soul is an eternal vessel, or an eternal implement of God, right? It is individualized for your experience here. Whether that gets reshaped into another experience in a different way on the next incarnation, that is up for debate. But you are here as a direct representative of the divine, right? Not divine in and of yourself, but created entirely from the divine, by the divine, for the purpose of the divine. And so, as that, you have use of the spirit. The spirit is eternal. You are composed. Your 5D navigation device, this temple of God, is composed entirely from the spirit, and it is enabled by the spirit. There is no part of it that is separated from the spirit at any point in time while you are existent upon the earth. And so for me, that is going to be the first ferment, right? You inside of the vessel, percolating to where you need to be. Namely, that to the moon, 367, the Opus Ad Lunam is the whitening albedo, which is compared with sunrise. That would not be a good explanation. Right? That would be sunrise. Right? The whitening, the light penetrating into the void, all of that would be represented directly by the sunrise. There is no need to have the moonrise be part of that. Right? You can look at the moon. Right? The moon is only the representative of the infinitesimal point inside of the limitless void. Right? That is what the moon represents. That is the whole reason for the allegory of the moon being alchemical at all. Right? It is even the cycle thereof, where it gets lighter and darker. You can still see it when it's a new moon. You still know where it is, right? It is still the light in the darkness. It is still the point in the void. That is the moon. And that, as the representative, is the void, right? There is a point in the void. There is dark in the light. The moon would represent the dark and the light, but the sun represents the point in the dark. And so the whitening, the albedo, would be the sunrise, not compared with, not the moon. And it does not make sense. Namely, that to the moon, and it is the light of all lights, and the flower and fruit of all lights. Again, that would be the sun, which lighteth all things. Again, that would be the sun. 368 and 369. 368, that is of all luminaries, an example, the stars. Now, on top of that, the moon is not luminous. The moon is reflective. There is a massive difference between those two things. The sun is luminous. The sun gives out light. That is right? Or that is illumination. Illumination is possessing the light and dispensing it. The moon is not doing that. The moon is reflecting the light from the point within the dark. And so comparing it with the sunrise is not going to be correct, right? All of the luminaries, again, not an allegory for the moon. The moon is a body, but it is not luminous in and of itself. Yes, we have the lens of history, right? We can look back on these things, but that should have been fairly obvious even then because of the cycle of the moon. And 369 was just a reference to another book. This almost hymn-like paean of the materia lepidus, or the tincture, refers in the first instance to Luna, for it is during her work of whitening that the illumination takes place. Again, incorrect, right? If you substitute soul for this, it would be perfectly fine. But for Luna, it is not. She is the mother in this art. In her water, soul is hidden like a fire. Is it hidden or is it reflected? 370. Glorious Mundi. A parallel to the conception of Selene as the Greek word in Plutarch. On the first day of the month of Faminoth, Osiris enters into Selene, and this is evidently equivalent to the Syndos in the spring. Thus they make the power of Osiris to be fixed in the moon. 371. 371 is from Isis and Osiris. Selene, Plutarch says, is the male-female and is impregnated by Helios. I mention these statements because they show that the moon has a double light. Outside a feminine one, but inside a masculine one, which is hidden in it as a fire. Again, not true. Luna is really the mother of the sun, which means psychologically that the unconscious is pregnant with consciousness and gives birth to it. That is an extrapolation. There is no reason for any of that to be anything near causative or correlative even, right? And Luna is the mother of the sun. At best, that is opposite, but there is no real reason to believe either one, really, right? It is entirely possible that the moon was a chunk knocked off from the earth back when she was called Tiamat. There is a reason to believe that, even if it is not a definitively scientifically proven one, right? There is no reason to believe it came from the sun, right? We have the exact same composition, and by exact same composition, I mean that there is a direct correlation between the composition of the earth and certain parts of this planet. I mean, that is a direct correlation. There is not between us and Venus. There is not between us and Mercury. There are the same elements existent, but in much different configurations. The moon's configurations are fairly synonymous with the Earth's. There is very good reason to believe that the moon may have at one point in time been a piece of the Earth which was knocked off of it during a cosmic disturbance when the entirety of the night sky was broken apart from what was known before. There are many very good reasons for believing that. Again, I refer you to the Thunderbolts Project. They are much better at explaining. They have already done the work. I'm not trying to rework that work. It is good work. And so there is no reason at all, right? Other than, right, if Saturn disappeared and the sun became the sun and there was a outburst like the one we are anticipating, then possibly that outburst hit the planet as opposed to a comet, then there might be a reason to correlate it with the sun. But other than that, not really. Oh, and this especially, right? Which means psychologically that the unconscious is pregnant with consciousness and gives birth to it. There is no reason for that to be an allegory for this, right? Now, I'm not saying that this doesn't happen, right? I'm not saying that at all, because this does happen. But there is no reason to correlate that with the moon at all. There is no reason to do that. It is the night which is older than the day. Now that is definitely up for debate. Part of the darkness which gave birth to light, the proud light which is struggling to usurp the ancient rank and realm of the Mother Night. 372 is Gothe Faust. From darkness of the unconscious comes the light of illumination, the albedo. The opposites are contained in it in potentia, hence the hermaphroditism of the unconscious, its capacity for spontaneous and autochthonious reproduction. This idea is reflected in the Father-Mother of the Gnostics, 373, and is here. For instance, in Marcus, the Gnostic of Hippolytus Elenchios. This idea is reflected in the Father-Mother of the Gnostics, as well as in the naive vision of Brother Klaus, 374. That is a reference to Brother Klaus. And the modern vision of Maitland, 375. Anna Kingsford. Her life, letters, diary, and work. I have quoted this vision at some length in my commentary on The Secret of the Golden Flower, which we have done in its entirety if you are interested. I believe it is part of the Ancient Lore playlist, but it has its own as well. If you search on my page for Golden Flower, you will find the videos. We have done a very extensive study, and there was some good knowledge in there. There was meat. There was meat in that particular book. Finally, I would like to say a few words about the psychology of the moon, which is none too simple. The alchemical texts were written exclusively by men, and their statements about the moon are therefore the product of masculine psychology. Nevertheless, women did play a role in alchemy, as I have mentioned before, and this makes it possible that the symbolization will show occasional traces of their influence. Generally, the proximity, as well as the absence of women, has a specifically constellating effect on the unconscious of a man. When a woman is absent or unattainable, the unconscious produces in him a certain femininity, which expresses itself in a variety of ways and gives rise to numerous conflicts. The more one-sided his conscious masculine spiritual attitude, the more inferior, banal, vulgar, and biographical will be the compensating femininity of the unconscious. I would not agree with that. We're definitely fixing to step on toes with this one, but there is a very good reason why we have the masculine and feminine roles, right? The father protector, that's a thing. The father warrior, that's a thing. The father aggressor, that's a thing. The father tormentor, that's a thing, right? These are masculine traits. They are something that you do need to overcome, but they are traits, right? You need to utilize them effectively. There are feminine traits as well. The nurturing, the possessive, the jealous, the creative. These are all feminine traits. But this right here, this is assigning something that is not right. I don't care how long it's been written. I don't care who wrote it down. It is not because you don't have a woman that you become more inferior, banal, vulgar, and biological. That is not your feminine side coming out, but that is an incorrect expression of your masculine tendencies. That's what banal, vulgar, and biological will be. I'm sorry. If that offends you, too bad. Men have this tendency. If you are unbalanced, you have this tendency more than women do. And if this is exhibiting in women, it is a masculine trait. Right? You have feminine and masculine traits as well. The protective father that we just talked about, that is expressing a feminine trait. Right? In a positive masculine way, but it is the protection. Women are more concerned about protection than men are. Right? That's just a simple fact. Even it doesn't matter how you look at it. Men like to protect their family. They like to protect their values. That is true. But that is an expression of the feminine. That is a positive expression of the feminine in a masculine man. You are to be balanced. You should be capable of great violence, but you should be capable of restraining that to the appropriate measures. Right? That restraint comes from balancing the feminine side, not the masculine side. This is not right. Now, the more one-sided, that is true, right? But this is not femininity, right? Inferior, banal, vulgar, and biological will not be the compensated femininity. That will be the undercompensated. That will be not accounted for femininity. That would be ignoring the femininity, but it is not the compensating. It's just not. He will, perhaps, not be conscious at all of its dark manifestations because they have been so overlaid with saccharine sentimentality that he not only believes the humbug himself, but enjoys putting it over on other people. An avowedly biological or coarse-minded attitude to women produces an excessively lofty valuation of femininity in the unconscious, where it is pleased to take the form of Sophia or of the Virgin. And again, right, an avowedly biological means that you are desirous of sex all of the time. That is a complete misbalance of the virtue that is chastity, and an overtaking of the vice that is lust. There is a balance between those that is stricken. It is a sacred union. That is what most people are to end up in with the one person. If you are over-focused upon sex, that is not a feminine trait. That is a masculine trait. Again, right? An avowedly biological or coarse-minded attitude towards women, that is masculine. That is not feminine. This is a misattribution. Totally. Frequently, however, it gets distorted by everything that misogyny can possibly devise to protect the masculine consciousness from the influence of women, so that the man succumbs instead to unpredictable moods and insensate resentments. And this is not taking into account your feminine side, right? This is that you are not doing your shadow work. If you have instead unpredictable moods, right? If your actions are dependent upon the situation, that is going to be a feminine trait. Insensate resentments, right? Resentments that make no sense. Again, statements by men on the subject of female psychology suffer principally from the fact that the projection of unconscious femininity is always strongest where critical judgment is most needed. That is, where a man is involved emotionally. In the metaphorical descriptions of the alchemist, Luna is primarily a reflection of a man's unconscious femininity. But she is also the principle of the feminine psyche, in the sense that soul is the principle of a man's, and as an allegory that is perfectly fine. Right? Even as the as above, the as below, which I use, right? The as above, as below, right? Masculine, feminine, masculine, feminine. This is particularly obvious in the astrological interpretation of sun and moon, not to mention the age-old assumptions of mythology. Alchemy is inconceivable without the influence of her elder sister, astrology. That is not true, right? They have been intricately linked. I do not deny that at all. But alchemy or astronomy, for the most part, is merely the mimetic device that we were talking about before. There is no direct correlation on the effectiveness of brewing a potion on this day versus that day. Almost certainly. There may be a small amount of magnetic influence, but it is not going to be enough to make a difference in the actual physical effect of the thing. And so it is not inconceivable. You could indeed have come up with alchemy completely independent of astrology. The fact that they were linked together so inextricably for so long doesn't change the fact that it could have been independent, right? There is nothing necessarily in physical alchemy that is dependent upon the stars. And the statements of these three disciplines must be taken into account in any psychological evaluation of the luminaries. If then, Luna characterizes the feminine psyche, and Sol the masculine, consciousness would be an exclusively masculine affair, which is obviously not the case, since woman possesses consciousness too. But as we have previously identified Sol with consciousness and Luna with unconsciousness, we would now be driven to the conclusion that a woman cannot possess the consciousness. That is indeed one of the errors that I have been pointing out. The error in our formulation lies in the fact, firstly, that we equated the moon with the unconscious as such, whereas the equation is true chiefly of the unconscious of a man. No, it is not, right? That is simply what you were saying. There is, you can look at it that way. You can hold that as the mimetic device, but that does not make it true, right? It does not make it true that the sun is the consciousness of man, or that it is not the consciousness of woman. That is something that you are assigning to it. You use both equally, right? Both of them are the source of both masculine and feminine. Right? And even linking it to consciousness is not even really a good thing. It's really not. You can use the sun as an allegory for consciousness for all people. That is fine. You can attribute it masculine traits because it is the penetrative force. That's what I do. I'm going to say that's fine. But you cannot say that it is merely the domain of men's consciousness. That is an assumption, right? That is not just assigning something, but that is assigning something that there is no way of verifying. There is no, you can use it as a device, right? I'm not trying to take away from that, but using it as a device does not make it true, right? And secondly, we overlook the fact that the moon is not only dark, but it is also a giver of light and can therefore represent consciousness. It is not a giver of light. It is a reflector of light, and that is a very important distinction. I understand it may not seem that way, right? On the surface level, it's not. But a mirror is not a source of light. That is what the moon is. It is a mirror. It is not a source in and of itself. It does not have its own luminary self. That's why it can be occluded by the shadow of the earth, right? If it was luminary, there would be no cycle of the moon. You would not have this issue. This is indeed so in the case of a woman. Her consciousness has a lunar rather than a solar character. Its light is the mild light of the moon, which merges things together rather than separates them. It does not show up objects in all their pitiless discreteness and separateness like the harsh, glaring light of the day, but blends in a deceptive shimmer, the near and the far, magically transforming little things into big things, high and low, softening all color into a bluish haze, and blending the nocturnal landscape into an unsuspected unity. For purely psychological reasons, I have, in other of my writings, tried to equate the masculine consciousness with the concept of logos, and the feminine with that of eros. And so this is a complete, utter misunderstanding of logos altogether. That is not uncommon, right? What I believe is apparently so far outside of the box that nobody else has seen it, right? Logos is the spirit in motion. It is quite literally the effect of change in every single instance, right? That can absolutely be looked at as the masculine trait, right? Before the beginning, there was God, and God was infinite and without form. The void. That could be considered the feminine because it accepts the light. And then God decided to become and became the creation, limiting himself from the infinite into the finite. All things existent, all elements existent, but none combined. No compounds. Utter stasis, that moment, is the beginning, the snapshot of time before time starts. But when time starts, the creation becomes, the changes occur, the accretion begins, light moves for the first time. All of that, that is Logos. From the very second that anything was set into motion inside of the creation, that is the Logos, right? And so this masculine concept of the Logos is true, right? That is the penetrative point. It is the part of change. But Eros is love, right? Physical love more than anything. And no, right? Just no, right? The accepting, yes, fine, right? You can even attribute that masculine, but it is both. The Logos is both masculine and feminine. It is the spirit in motion. It is all of these things, accepting the light and giving the light. There is really no... You can attribute the masculine, you can, because it is the change, because it is the point that goes into. That works. But this comparing it and contrasting it with the Eros, that is not going to work. You can contrast it with the void, but Eros doesn't really stand in the place of the void, right? That is why I'm going through such pains to make this distinction. Eros is not the void. The void would be the feminine. That would be the part that the Logos penetrates. By Logos, I meant discrimination, judgment, insight. And by Eros, I meant the capacity to relate. I regarded both concepts as intuitive ideas which cannot be defined accurately or exhaustively. That is not true. I have spent an exhaustive amount of time accurately describing these things. I understand that is a prideful statement, right? I try to acknowledge where those things happen. What I just said took a considerable amount of time to formulate in the way that I said it. Every single word of what I said was said with intention because it is the truth. Now it is my understanding of the truth, but it is hopefully an objectively observable understanding of why and how these definitions should be. That is the point of this, right? Not to say, oh, I'm right and they're wrong, but to define why this is, right? Eros and void are not the same thing. That is why I made the distinction. The void and Logos together does work for this, but the definition is not right. Even this capacity to relate. Are you trying to say that men, masculine, don't have the capacity to relate? Talk about war. Talk about sports, right? Masculine traits with the capacity to relate to them. The capacity to relate is neither masculine nor feminine, right? Neither is discrimination, judgment, insight, right? Those things are both too, right? Now you may use your masculine traits to give judgment, to have discrimination, to seek insight, but it is not intrinsically masculine to have discrimination, judgment, or insight. From the scientific point of view, this is regrettable, but from a practical one, it has value, since the two concepts mark out a field of experience which is equally difficult to define. I think I've done it better. And again, I know that sounds heady, but it is not meant that way. as we can hardly ever make a psychological proposition without immediately having to reverse it. Instances to the contrary leap to the eye at once. Men who care nothing for discrimination, judgment, and insight, and women who display an almost excessively masculine proficiency in this respect. I would like to describe such cases as the regular exceptions. And you know why? Because it is not an exception, because it is not a rule. Right? The exceptions are to the rules, and this is not a rule, and you just stated that. You just stated that this is not a rule. They demonstrate, to my mind, the common occurrence, if it is common, the common occurrence of a cyclically predominant contrasexuality. Wherever this exists, we find a forcible intrusion of the unconscious, a corresponding exclusion of the consciousness aspect to either sex, predominance to the shadow and of contrasexuality, and to a certain extent, even the presence of symptoms of possession, such as compulsions, phobias, obsessions, automatisms, exaggerated effects, etc. This inversion of roles is probably the chief psychological source for the alchemical concept of the hermaphrodite. In a man, it is the lunar anima, in a woman, the solar animus, that influences consciousness in the highest degree. Even if a man is often unaware of his own anima possession, he has, understandably enough, all the more vivid an impression of the animus possession of his wife, and vice versa. Logos and eros are intellectually formulated intuitive equivalents of the archetypical images of Sol and Luna. In my view, the two luminaries are so descriptive and so superlatively graphic in their implications that I would prefer them to the more pedestrian terms logos and eros. That is because it should be logos and the void. Although the latter do pin down certain psychological peculiarities more aptly than the rather indefinite Sol and Luna. The use of these images require at any rate an alert and lively fantasy, and this is not an attribute of those who are inclined by temperament to purely intellectual concepts. These offer us something finished and complete, whereas an archetypical image has nothing but its naked fullness, which seems inapprehensible by the intellect. Concepts are coined and negotiable values. Images are life. If our formula regarding the lunar nature of feminine consciousness is correct, and in view of the consensus omnium in this matter, it is difficult to see how it should not be. We must conclude that this consciousness is of a darker, more nocturnal quality, and because of its lower luminosity, can easily overlook differences which to a man's consciousness are self-evident stumbling blocks. It needs a very moonlight consciousness indeed to hold a large family together regardless of all the differences, and to talk and act in such a way that the harmonious relation of the parts to the whole is not only disturbed but is actually enhanced. And where the ditch is too deep, a ray of moonlight smooths it over. A classical example of this is the conciliatory proposal of St. Catherine of Alexandria in Anatole France's Penguin Island. The Heavenly Council would come to a deadlock over the question of baptism, since, although the penguins were animals, they had been baptized by Saint Miel. Therefore, she says, "That is why, Lord, I entreat you to give the old male penguins a human head and breast, so that they can praise you worthily, and grant them also an immortal soul, but only a little one." 376. From Penguin Island. I do not get why this is involved. A classic example of the conciliatory proposal of St. Catherine of Alexandria is because someone baptized a penguin. She says, give it a human head and breast so that they can praise you. I'm just going to let that go. Yeah. This lunatic logic can drive the rational mind to the white heat of frenzy. Fortunately, it operates mostly in the dark, or cloaks itself in the shimmer of innocence. The moon nature is its own best camouflage, as it once becomes apparent when a woman's unconscious masculinity breaks through into her consciousness and thrusts her eros aside. Then it is all up with her charm and the mitigating half-darkness. She takes a stand on some point or other and capitiously defends it, although each barbed remark tears her own flesh, and with brutal short-sightedness she jeopardizes everything that is the dearest goal of womanhood. And then, for unfathomable reasons, or perhaps simply because it is time, the picture changes completely. The new moon has once more been vanquished. The soul who personifies the feminine unconscious is not the sun of the day, but corresponds rather to the soul negere. It is not the real soul negere of masculine psychology, the alter ego, the brother Medardus of the E.T.A. Hoffman story The Devil's Elixir, or the crass identity of opposites which we meet with in Jekyll and Hyde. The unconscious soul of woman may be dark, but it is not coal black. As was said of the moon, it is more like a chronic eclipse of the sun, which in any case is seldom total. Normally, a woman's consciousness emits as much darkness as light, so that if her consciousness cannot be entirely light, her unconscious cannot be entirely dark either. That is for all humanity. That is not for any particular gender. At any rate, when the lunar phases are repressed on account of too powerful solar influences, her consciousness takes on an overbright solar character, while on the other hand her unconscious becomes darker and darker, nigrum nigres nigro, and both are unendurable for both in the long run. Her soul negere is a void of light, and charm as the gentling moonlight is all heavenly peace and magic. It protests too much that it is a light because it is no light, and a great truth because it invariably misses the mark, and a high authority which nevertheless is always wrong, or is only as right as the blind tomcat who tried to catch imaginary bats in broad daylight, but one day caught a real one by mistake and thereafter became completely unteachable. I do not want to be unfair, but that is what the feminine soul is like when it obtrudes too much. And it has to obtrude a bit if the man is to understand it. As a man normally gets to know his anima only in projected form, so too a woman in the case of her dark sun. When her eros is functioning properly, her sun will not be too dark, and the carrier of projection may even produce some useful compensation. But if things are not right with her eros, in which case she is being unfaithful to love itself, the darkness of her sun will transfer itself to a man who is anima possessed and who dispenses inferior spirit, which, as we know, is as intoxicating as the strongest alcohol. The dark sun of feminine psychology is connected with the father imago, since the father is the first carrier of the animus image. He endows this virtual image with semblance and form, for on account of his logos, he is the source of spirit for the daughter. Unfortunately, this source is often sullied just where we would expect clean water. For the spirit that benefits a woman is not mere intellect, it is far more. It is an attitude, the spirit, by which a man lives. 377. Spirit and life. Even a so-called ideal spirit is not always the best if it does not understand how to deal adequately with nature, that is, with the animal man. This really would be ideal. Hence, every father is given the opportunity to corrupt, in one way or another, his daughter's nature, and the educator, husband, or psychiatrist then has to face the music. For what has been spoiled by the father, 378, the I Ching or the Book of Changes, hexagram, work on what has been spoiled, hexagram 18. For what has been spoiled by the father can only be made good by a father, just as what has been spoiled by the mother can only be repaired by a mother. The disastrous repetition of the family pattern could be described as the psychological original sin, or as the curse of the Atreides running through the generation. But in judging these things, one should not be too certain, either of good or of evil. The two are about equally balanced. Agreed. It should, however, have begun to dawn on our cultural optimists that the forces of good are not sufficient to produce either a rational world order or the faultless ethical behavior of the individual, whereas the forces of evil are so strong that they imperil any order at all and can imprison the individual in a devilish system that commits the most fearful crimes, so that even if he is ethical minded, he must finally forget his moral responsibility in order to go on living. The malignity of collective man has shown itself in more terrifying form today than ever before in history, and it is by this objective standard that the greater and lesser sins should be measured. We need more caustic subtlety because it is no longer a question of extirpating evil, but of the difficult art of putting a lesser evil in place of a greater one. The time for the sweeping statements so dear to the evangelizing moralist, which lighten his task in the most agreeable way, is long past. Nor can the conflict be escaped by a denial of moral values. The very idea of this is foreign to our instincts and contrary to nature. Every human group that is not actually sitting in prison will follow its accustomed paths according to the measure of its freedom. Whatever the intellectual definition and evaluation of good and evil may be, the conflict between them can never be eradicated, for no one can ever forget it. Even the Christian, who feels himself delivered from evil, will, when the first rapture is over, remember the thorn in the flesh, which even St. Paul could not pluck out. These hints may suffice to make clear what kind of spirit it is that the daughter needs. They are the truths which speak to the soul, which are not too loud and do not insist too much, but reach the individual in stillness, the individual who constitutes the meaning of the world. It is this knowledge that the daughter needs in order to pass it on to her son. And that is going to bring us to the end of the moon. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. This one was a difficult one for me, right? There's a lot in this that can be taken either way. There's a lot in this that is an extrapolation that is not necessarily true. I feel like I have pointed out where those points are fairly effectively. I hope I have described the reasons why as effectively, right? The differentiation between eros and the void is a vast one, right? The void is not love. The void is nothing. The sun, the point that penetrates, is the creation of things. The void is the thing that it is created from, not the creation itself. It is not love. It is not even necessarily nurture, right? It is the prima materia. It is the thing from which all comes. But it is not even necessarily feminine. That is something that we attributed to it. I described why, right? I believe that the point that accepts would be the feminine. The point that penetrates is going to be the masculine. That is why I differentiate between the white and the dark in that particular way. I can be wrong on that. That is one of those things, right? It is not really masculine. It is not really feminine. That is just how we anthropomorphize it. This contained a good bit of stuff that was valueless, right? The whole point about the bloody mirror, there may be an allegory there. I do not have a key that even slightly unlocks that. That there is no correlation whatsoever to me for that in reality. There's simply not. The understanding that he had that consciousness as the masculine element is restricted to the masculine, that's not going to be right either, right? The masculine is going to be the penetrative. Thoughts would be penetrative, therefore that is going to be the masculine, right? But that is only because of that. And it is not intrinsic that the light brings the consciousness to a man and the dark brings consciousness to a woman. In fact, that is kind of antithetical to logic. And so that's where I'm going to wrap this one up. Hopefully I have explained well enough as we've gone along. I'm ready to get to salt. Salt is going to be dealing with the body, right? We've dealt with the soul. We've dealt with the spirit. It's time to dive into the body. I am ready for that. So if you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment. Throw me a hype. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Give me hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership. Picking up a copy of my book where I teach you all of these things and hopefully explain them well enough. Or directly consulting me through the link provided down below. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.